Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also support the show by visiting thebittertruth.info, I-N-F-O, and you can buy some fabulous swag to make your life better. Or if you want to actually subscribe to the Patreon page, the link is there as well. We've also got essays and things like that. Today, I have the mighty Heaton, Andrew Heaton, who is a former contributor at Fox Business News. He's written for Reason Magazine. He's been all over the place. I'm going to put his credits in the notes of the show. But I'm always excited when he's able to come on because he's got a different take than most people do on matters of the world. How are you, man?
Good, thanks. Good to be back. And I'd say my biggest credit is I host the Political Orphanage. So if at the end of today's episode, if any of your listeners are like, I'd listen to that guy again, go check out the Political Orphanage. And good to be back in the meantime.
Awesome, man. Hey, so check this out. Friday, apparently, we're just being more and more brazen about the crap we're pulling overseas. So this guy named Ned Price, he's the State Department spokesman. If you've never seen him, he's a skinny dweeby guy. I think he's maybe in his 30s. He's like if Jen Psaki and Hillary Clinton decided to have a baby and they got a stop sign to be the sperm donor, that would be this guy. And he basically came out, I think it was Friday. I saw a clip over the weekend, and he basically came out and he said that Cuba's having issues, and when they have their protests on November 15th, we will be there to support them. Now, in my experience, the United States usually reacts to such protests as a big shock and a surprise, and then we talk about human rights and we try to justify sanctions or why we're going to go to war. Is this kind of unusual for a guy to announce that there's going to be protests on November 15th and it's basically going to be an NED or USAID cutout? I mean,
my guess is when he says that we're going to be there to support him, he means we will rhetorically support them. I don't think that we're going to do it. Now we have a colorful history of invading Cuba. We've done that a couple of times now. We did it when it was a Spanish protectorate, and then we most recently did it during the Bay of Pigs, and then periodically somebody like Marco Rubio or John Bolton will want to launch us into a quasi invasion to liberate the Cuban people. I think the best thing we could do with Cuba is to normalize trade relations, to open up the borders with them, so that when they eventually do implode, because that's what happens with communist countries, communism doesn't work terribly well, and they basically have a communist dynasty, which is an even worse form, they're at some point going to open up. I would love to be in a position where we already had good relationship with them. And I think the way to do that is to remind the Cuban people, we do that through policy and through legislative action and trade policy, that we don't have a problem with the Cuban people, and we've never had a problem with the Cuban people. We think their government is dumb, but we don't have a problem with them. And so one thing we could do is maybe let Americans freely exercise our right to travel. I take great umbrage with the fact that I am a free citizen of a free country, and I am prohibited from visiting Cuba. Who the hell are you to tell me where I can and can't go?
I know.
If they want to give me an advisory and say that it's a bad idea, or that I might get in trouble, or there's bears or something, thank you for the word of warning. But I'll go where I please, thanks. If I want to buy Cuban cigars, I'll buy whatever I want. And that I think would be the way to give them the support they need. That we've been stupidly trying to starve Cuba for 50 years now. It hasn't worked. It obviously hasn't worked. So now it's just this kind of mean-spirited thing we're doing. And the better thing that we could do is just open up and prepare for when they eventually reintegrate into the global economy.
Two things. The simple part first. My problem with this Ned Price guy in general, he's a schmuck, but my problem is that to come out and announce a protest before it actually happens a couple of weeks ahead of time, that's just brazen. That's just basically saying, now we're lying to your face. We're stealing in broad daylight. We don't care. Right. And then to just address a quick thing that you had just said, if Cuba didn't have a million sanctions on them and were able to trade freely, right now they trade with like 5 countries, they wouldn't be the quote failure. And I've been to Cuba. They actually there's 0 homeless people in Cuba, by the way, 0. And there's more people that walked on the moon that I know personally that have been to Cuba. I know like 8 people that went to Cuba. When I went about 8 years ago, I had to get notes and know how to do it because there's no banks there. You don't have a credit card. You don't have anything. Got to fly to another country and then fly to Cuba. It's like an ordeal, right? It's worth it when you get there. We're there for like 10 days at 5 cities, but we didn't see any homeless people. They produce more doctors and teachers per capita than any country in the world. Right. And so it's like, if we would leave them alone and let them trade, who cares? I mean, Vietnam is communist and they trade pretty much on the open market unencumbered. And now they're a top 5 United States destination to retire.
Yeah.
So,
No, Vietnam's a wonderful example. I went to Vietnam about 3 years ago, and first thing you do when you get off the plane, it says like, "Hello, welcome to Vietnam." It's all in English.
yeah,
They want to sell you Coca-Cola products and like just buy stuff. And
sure.
Vietnam's, I think, a really good example too. And Vietnam, it's nominally communist, but it has a vibrant black market economy.
Well, sure.
Where my friend that was visiting Vietnam when he moved there, like the guy that was stamping his passport was like, "Welcome to Vietnam. You're going to want to exchange your currency. You can use the official government exchange, which is down the street to the left. You don't want to go there. If I were you, I'd go to the black market. You're going to go over there to the right, and then go up the stairs, that kind of thing." I think Cuba has pretty good trade relations with the rest of the world. I think we're actually the odd man out on that. In that most other countries are not exercising a boycott against Cuba.
Well, the only EU country that trades with them is Italy, right? And then they trade with China. They trade with Russia, they trade with Iran, and a few other countries, Vietnam, and there's about 8 or 9 countries total that they trade with, and parts of South America.
I stand corrected. I thought that we were kind of the holdouts, but that's the norm. Is this
pretty much?
They're an international trade pariah.
Pretty much. I mean, the EU, except for Italy, and Italy beats their own drum. They don't care. Italy trades with them. I think Portugal does, and then it's about 9 countries. It's not a lot of countries, and
really? Okay.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the reason why it's easy to sanction them and deprive them of medicine and everything else that they need. And so it's kind of like, and also this is my theory. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is why we don't screw with socialist countries outside of Central and South America. And this is my theory, because if Americans saw a successful socialist country in Bolivia, which we screwed with, or Venezuela, which we screw with, then they would say, well, how come we can't have nice things? Right. And meanwhile, we don't even question Colombia, who has a 50% poverty rate, right? They murder journalists and campesinos by the thousands. They kill labor leaders. They rig elections. Wow, that sounds invasion worthy to me. I don't know why we're not invading Colombia. We keep screwing with Venezuela.
Yeah. So two rejoinders to that. I think one, America has a very colorful history of murdering dictators or propping up dictators. And it's never been based on ideology. It's always been based on realpolitik. And South America is a very good example of that, of us being in bed with bad people. We do that abroad too, right? We've done that like the Taliban we armed the Taliban. Saddam Hussein, we armed him to fight Iran. We've got a very good track record of propping up evil people that eventually turn on us. And the fact right now that we're arm in arm with Saudi Arabia, which is a feudal despotism that's homophobic and theocratic and like literally no American values. I've never been to Saudi Arabia. Again, the people are probably great. I'm sure there's all sorts of wonderful things about hospitality and being friendly.
Sure.
But the government, the regime that is in place has no American values whatsoever, other than, I guess, hating Iran. So the American foreign policy experience has never really been, or has rarely been, something that's actually focused on ideological agenda.
100%.
It's realpolitik. Henry Kissinger. The other bit, the socialist bit, I got to say, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about. I would love for America to fully integrate with all countries that were able to do so, including socialist countries. And if they've got some good ideas, I will absolutely plagiarize them and bring them over.
Sure.
I don't think it's very likely, but I'm not afraid of it.
Well, it's not, because we're a privatized concern now, aren't we? We're owned. And when people tell me, "Oh, government," I'm like, name me something that government still runs besides the airport. I mean, like the IRS is a private corporation that's got a contract with the Department of the Treasury. It's not. We don't have a single government entity that runs anything. It's private prisons. It's private charter schools.
Wait, hold on. Walk me through that. The IRS is a private for-profit organization. It's not a federal agency.
IRS has never been a federal agency. The IRS, really? No, they're incorporated in Delaware, man. Oh yeah, that's challenge. Yeah.
So, I mean, but their administrators are all appointed by Congress. The IRS is not internally selected; it's appointed by Congress, right?
Right, but
the employees are all federal employees.
But they are incorporated in Delaware, and they have a contract with the Department of the Treasury, and that's who gets to hire for them is the Congress. But technically, they're not. It's like the post office has a contract with the Postmaster General. That's why when you go to USPS.com, right, it's its own deal. However, they're the only contract they have is with the Postmaster General, right? So they are technically a government entity, and our dollars go to our stamp money goes to run them, and then they also are able, because they're a government entity and not privatized, like Britain has been privatizing their postal service. to disastrous effect because a lot of rural areas now are not getting their mail, and they got to go drive an hour into town to go get their mail now. And that's what's going to happen when you privatize everything. And we are a privatized country. Our government is privatized. I mean, our Congress is bought, and that's not. I think right or left. But go ahead.
I'll agree with you on some of that. I'm going to push back on some of it. The part that I'll agree with you on it is I think Congress absolutely has its hands in a bunch of troughs, and that's the. I worked for the House, so it's I'm not trying to back them up. I don't think that it's a clear transactional thing the way people typically think it is, where you show up with a suitcase full of bills and go, hey, if you sign on to the corn subsidy bill, we'll give you all this money. I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is you're from Iowa, you're an Iowa corn farmer's son, you're in favor of it ends up being very parochial in that my district has an Air Force base and it has a soybean industry. And so I'm going to constantly try and pump money into the Air Force Base and the soybean industry. But you magnify that by 453 different members of Congress and you get a massive, untethered crony capitalist system. So that's absolutely there. And I don't dispute that. There's a ton of ill-gotten and corrupt federal money. Another thing that I'm going to withhold my tirade, but there's a tremendous regulatory capture. Yeah. Oh, okay. Then I think something that is really a big problem is regulatory capture, where basically what happens is a hotel burns down and some people die, and then I'm sure there's some lobby called the American Hotel Association or American Hotel Federation. They will approach Congress and they'll go, "This was horrible. What a horrible thing that these people died in this hotel. We, the hotel industry, are asking you, Congress, to regulate us. We want you to regulate us. We've actually drafted this plan for you that has what we think would be the safest way to run a hotel, and it has what we think would be the perfect amount of fire escapes and fire. And what they do is they just give them the schematics for Marriott and for all of the big ones. And what they're intentionally doing is they're trying to run out all the little guys because they want to cripple B&B, and they want to. So that happens all the time. It happens in all sorts of different industries. Right? So that's all happening. The bit that I'd push back on is I think that the extent of privatization is overstated, and I think that that's probably because we're using different definitions. I would say that if the organization in question is tax funded, the employees are federal employees, and the head of it is appointed by Congress. To me, that is government. If you call it a government corporation or it's I don't know, whatever the taxonomy of it is, it's less important to me to the function. So I don't think the privatization is that much. I think where you've seen privatization actually happen is, like you bring up, liberalization of post offices abroad. That's a great example of privatization. And then occasionally some industry will have that happen, like in Britain as well, when Thatcher denationalized the coal industry. Or in the Soviet Union when they became Russians, and then just or when they broke apart and the constituent states basically just handed the old existing national apparatus to whatever thug was friends with Putin or Yeltsin at the time. Right. Those are examples of privatization. I don't think we're that privatized. I think
we are.
The government spending. I mean, government's what 40% of the economy is controlled by the federal government or so. It's government spending.
And what is that? That's what Eisenhower warned us about. What is that? It's the military industrial complex. That's most of the jobs. I mean, I go to North Texas. I mean, I drive all over for my day job, and I run into people that work at Raytheon all the time and that kind of thing. And you go to a town like El Paso, for example, big city. It gets a bad rap, but it's not a shithole. I've been through it a couple of times. It's actually a very nice community. I've played pool and met very nice people. I bet
there's good food there. I bet you can go to good.
Oh my God! And I'm not being paid by these people, but Cattleman's Ranch. If you're ever in El Paso, the best pozole made by this nice little lady who takes the leftover prime rib from the night before, and you had a choice of the red on Sunday or the green one on Monday, and it's amazing. So there's that. But that is largely part of it. I mean, the discretionary spending in this country, what is it? 60% is, or actually 60% is defense. And the remaining 40% is a smattering. And then I don't know if you were paying attention to the Build Back Crappier bill that Uncle Joe did. The build
not in tremendous detail, but yeah.
Okay. So the Build Back Better, which is basically, hey, let's give more money to the top 1,000 richest motherfuckers in this country, which is what they did. So, for example, it was supposed to be a $10 trillion bill over the next 10 years. It got winnowed down to $1.5 trillion. And things like free college, free community college, right? That got struck out, which is interesting because I went to community college for free, right? I went for free. And I'm going to say I'm older than you because I know I'm older than you. And I went to college for free. See, so when people act like I want a pony, I take umbrage with that because I went to state school for free. When I graduated, I was paying $100 a quarter for pretty much all you can eat units. I didn't pay for lab. I didn't pay for any of that stuff. I paid for books, paid for my dorm, right? But I did not pay $7,000 a quarter like my buddy's kid who got out of my old school 2 years ago did, right? Community college was not $150, $300 a unit. Community college was $5 a semester, $5 to park, and you had to be in the clinic, which was $5 because they wanted to make sure that at least every kid got a shot for the clap if he was too busy. Okay. That was it. $15 a semester to go to community college. And now they're trying to say that, oh, we can't afford that. We used to afford that before you started saddling kids with privatized student loans, right? Which is where we're at. And to forgive student debt is about $1.3 trillion, right? And people go, where are we going to get the money? Last year,
it's massive, and you also can't get out from under it. You're not allowed to declare bankruptcy.
No, and by the way,
books from '78, I think.
Actually, that was new. That was Joe Biden. You could declare bankruptcy on student loans, and then in 2005, Joe Biden was able to put that into the bankruptcy laws as a senator.
Yeah,
that's why he's called Senator Credit Card.
Can I ask this real quick? Because I'm on board with the concept of funding community college. That makes sense to me. Like, I think if we were to go through different reasons that college is important, having a viable trade skill to me makes sense from a public expenditure. Like, I'm not really interested in funding. I should say definitively, I am not interested in taxing you or the people listening to your program to give an upper middle class child a study abroad thing to enrich their horizon.
See, but that's a canard. That's a canard. I'm going to push back on it.
But wait, hold on.
Yeah.
But the idea of like, hey, we're going to teach people vocational skills. We're going to give them like basically treating community college like high school 2.1 of going, the world is different. The global economy is different. Therefore, what we would all consider kind of the base level of public education should be extended. I'm on board with that. I'm on board. I don't have a problem with this. The only concern I have is I don't know what the cost control measures would be. And the reason I say this is one of the plans that was floated over the last couple of years was to have the federal government just pay back community colleges to just write them a check for whatever they
Sure.
I think what would immediately happen is you would find that community colleges would suddenly double the payment to everybody there. They would start building things in order to soak up that money. So I'm not sure. I mean, I guess you could have like some kind of control board that would just say, now you can't pay any professor more than $100,000 a year, whatever. Like, what mechanisms do you have in place to not have it indefinitely balloon?
Well, see, and then to your point about vocational training, B4, and this is the crux of or not the crux, but it's one of my points of contention with a privatized school system, which is what we have in the secondary schools. So, for example, when you have like UT, I live in Austin, Texas. UT guys my age used to go to UT for $300 a semester. Okay, it was all you can eat units for $300 a semester. Now it's $9,000 a semester, and extra labs and things like that cost extra. So what happens? You are now in a glorified vocational school. You're majoring in IT or business. It's all the STEM crap. You're not. English majors are through the floor, right? There's nobody learning more stuff. So you're going in there as a vocational school. You're going in there to learn accounting or to learn IT. And you don't, like when I was in college, if I wanted to take a marriage and family class, I took it. It didn't cost me any more money. God forbid I'm more interesting at a party if I take some classes. I took philosophy. I took a bunch of crap that were not in my major, right? That I was able to take because I could afford it. It wasn't going to be extra money to take a class. So now we have a glorified vocational training school, and it's exactly as designed. I mean, now the system has a bunch of cogs that learn their thing, and they are in lockstep, and they don't. It just. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, I just see it at the victim of the privatization of schools.
Wait, hold on. But why are you? UT's not a private school, is it?
No, it's a state
school.
It's a state school, but when you're paying $9,000 a semester and you can't take extra classes because it's going to be more than what you can't take an extra labs or extra. You want to take an elective that's outside of your curriculum year, you can't just take it, right?
I mean, it sounds to me like when a government institution doesn't do well and has a problem with price mechanisms, you're saying the problem is the private sector. Like, that's the read I'm getting from this. Is this thing's not working?
Who's guaranteeing? Who's guaranteeing the loans? The banks. The banks are guaranteeing these loans, and because you can't bankrupt on them. So it is private. It is private. You basically took state schools and turned them into private schools.
The banks can't dictate tuition. It's not like the banks sit around and then call.
No, but they can.
No.
But they can demand. But now the schools know that those loans are guaranteed. They can raise the tuition rates as they have. And now you're stuck.
Yes. And that's what happens. And that is exactly why they've been going up for two reasons. There's three. There's a temporary one that I'll give credit to people that want to throw money at it. There was a dip in 2008 during the depression or during the recession, because in 2008, universities that are public are typically funded at the state level. And the states have less ability to print based on or print money. You know, they can take bonds out, but basically you have to balance the budget if you're a state, right? So if you have half of your income, your taxable income reduced, as happened during a recession, that means that you have to cut programs, which is what happened. So you had universities cut the amount of money getting into them, like everything else in the state.
Sure.
And at the same time, there was more stress put on the system because everybody that was out of a job was like, well, I'll go get a master's degree, right? So now you have more. So that was a phenomenon. However, that's basically come back. We're now back at the same level of funding we were at around 2008. It's actually gone up a little bit. So it's not that states have defunded it. Two things have happened. One, there's some slippery language because I looked into this. You'll find that whenever you read academic literature on this, they always refer to it as the per student funding. Because they don't want to say general funding, because per student funding, they're like, per student funding's been halved over the last 20 years, or it's per student funding is what a third of it was in 1950. It's like, because if you tell everyone in America you have to have a college degree if you want to have a good job and be a full person, more people go to college, which is what's happened. In 1900, like 5% of the
not even
I think
very low
2%. Yeah,
very
2%.
low.
If you get to like 1950, it's like 15-20%. Even like 1990, it's like 20%. So
well, and that number has
more people to go do it.
Well, real quick,
so it basically you're dividing, even if you increase the funding, you're dividing it between students. So that's part of the problem. I think the secondary part of the reason that's come up is because basically what you're talking, you hit the nail on the head, which is that the universities become aware of capital available to them, and then they absorb it. And so they go, oh, wait a minute, you're going to give all the students like $10,000 extra in terms of Pell Grants or federal scholarships or whatever that thing is, or private sector things. If you're going to do that, then we'll just build a new pool and to try to incentivize people to come over here, and then we'll increase tuition, and we know that you guys will increase the amount of money available to you. I think that is more of a problem with the federal government, however, because that money is most out of grants rather than directly out of the private.
See, but then to that point, you got a ton of colleges that basically run ersatz professional football teams, right? They got money coming in. They got money coming in.
I'm a graduate of University of Oklahoma, which is a football team that happens to teach class. I'm with you.
Bingo. And so it's like you got coaches that are getting paid $4 or $5 million a year, like John Gruden level money. And you're going to
the highest paid public officials in most states in the union are football coaches. Possibly NBA or basketball coaches.
And so you got those revenues coming in both from TV and the concessions and the ticket receipts. So why aren't we having, and this is not a hard thing to do, as JFK famously said, man-made problems can be often solved by man. So why aren't we having colleges redirect some of those funds to minimize the cost to the student, right? I mean, private schools into the story. When I was a kid, USC was USC, and I went to Cal Poly. That was two different countries, right? But even UCLA, which was a little more expensive than Cal Poly, was $240 a quarter because my girlfriend went to UCLA when I was in college. Now, cut back to the 70s when my cousin went to UCLA. He went to UCLA and UCLA Law for $5 a quarter, the same price I was paying for junior college 10, 12 years later. So it's like this isn't. We're not doing any rocket science here. This is basic math. We got money to spend. We print money for the military all the time. And the stated budget is, and I'm backed up by the Wall Street Journal and Forbes on this. The stated budget for the military is now up to what, $790 billion a year. But when you factor in the nukes and the VA and the covert ops that we do overseas and our black ops and everything else, and our little secret stations where we torture people, that cuts into about $1.2 trillion a year. And we have 1,200 bases all over the world. You know how many bases the Chinese have outside of China? They have 2.
0? 2?
They have 2.
Yeah.
They just put one in Eritrea last year, and now all of a sudden we got a problem with Ethiopia and Eritrea because the Chinese have a base there. I think, why don't we just make deals with our enemies or peace with our enemies and deals with our friends? Yeah, that's what grown-ups would do.
Like, that's one of those things where when you're talking to your smug European friends about how they've got these wonderful social safety nets, the reason they have those wonderful social safety nets is because we've got their back. Like the reason.
Well, how about getting our back and have some wonderful social safety nets too? And we drag their ass in, and I am in complete favor of dismantling NATO. NATO is just a.
Oh, would you? I would do it, but I would stay in NATO, but I would just keep it a mutual defense network. I just wouldn't like. I think NATO's been very good, but I don't want to have active troops deployed over there. It would be like if you attack Germany, we will sail across the ocean and defend Germany, but we're not going to have a permanent base.
We don't need bases in Italy. Yeah, we don't need bases in Italy or Germany or France or anywhere. We don't need bases overseas. We just don't.
Again, is why they are able to afford social safety nets, because we are their army. Their army is ornamental, and we are basically providing the defense budget for all of Europe. Therefore, they don't have to spend money on the defense budget. They put it into social safety nets.
Okay, well, I mean,
put that money over here.
Put that money over here, and so it's not like we can't look. And I know you kind of lean libertarian and this, that, and the other. And I was in a discussion with a friend of mine last week, as I was telling you off mic. Great guy, loan pieces, known like over 30 years. But, when he starts going, well, then our taxes are going to go up. If my tax rate went up by 0.3 of a point to pay for, daycare for pre-K, I don't have kids, but I would like that. But why not? I mean,
I'd say I'm more of a Lib Dem character, but by which I mean, I tend to be I'm very opposed to central planning, and I'm very opposed to overregulation. Those are things that I'm very, very libertarian on. I like the idea of the social safety net. When it comes to a social safety net, the only issues that I have are the functionality of it and the efficiency of it. But I have no moral problem with raising taxes to take care of people. I think,
and it's not by, and that's the thing, it's not by that much. And that's the thing, it's not by that much. I mean, I'm already paying taxes anyway, right? I don't, and it's, we don't get that bang for our buck that other taxpayers in other countries do, right? It's and so I mean, and then when you talk about the military, we get into our shitty foreign policy. We have not met a treaty that we didn't wipe our ass with eventually, right? I mean, let's ask Muammar Gaddafi how that went for him when he gave up his nukes, right? And then the first thing people told me when that happened, well, Lockerbie. Well, God damn it, in 1988 we shot an Iranian jet fighter airline with civilians out of the sky, and all our president could say, George H.W. Bush, as he was running for re-election or election, I'm sorry, was, well, we don't make America doesn't apologize for anything. Well, that's kind of a cocksucker attitude. What do you mean? We just shot 200 civilians out of the sky. We should at least apologize. Say I'm sorry.
There's a big mindset in the United States of, and I don't know whether this is an American thing or a conservative thing or both, but there's a tendency to project my sense of worth onto the country itself being gigantic and kicking ass, which I don't think is well placed. I think this is, I'm going to swing libertarian here. We are, the government is a subset of society. The American society is a big, emergent order, messy, sloppy thing. And we're all just individuals in it. The government's a subset of that. The government is not it's not the essence of the American people. And you shouldn't, I don't think it's good to tether your ego and your self-esteem into how much ass kicking the country's doing. One of the kind of first social experiments that we had was kind of at the beginning of liberal democracy. So it's kind of maybe 50 to 100 years into the Enlightenment. There was this idea that you got from scholastics at the time that, like, in the past, we were having all these stupid wars in Europe because we had feudalism. And, the Duke and the Baron viewed all these people as toy soldiers that they could march around to try and get an extra acre in their duchy or something, right? But like now that we've empowered the average citizen like you and me to participate in democracy, the average citizen is going to realize that this is a horrible thing and peace will come and everything. Then it turned out actually that Western Europe became even more militant because there was a sense of nationalism and there was a sense of like, I'm just a crummy bricklayer in Leeds, but by God, I'm part of England and it's kicking ass in India. And so we need to go fight France and all these different things. And it's a very dangerous thing to do. I think you need to untether that. And I think that's why people get so worked up when like the president salutes in a funny way. We're like, you remember a few years ago when President Obama like bowed to the Emperor of Japan?
Right.
Okay. It's just a gesture. It's
every president that
this is not emblematic of him like weeping and saying we will do your bidding. It was just a politeness that you do in the same way that when George W. Bush holds hands with the dictator of
Saudi Arabia. Yep.
While you should be offended that he's doing that, it's not a gay thing. It's just what they do over there. They hold hands. Guys hold hands. It's a thing. I think we put way too much stock in that. And it unfortunately funnels into this whole machismo thing that becomes a way to prop up the industrial military complex.
Sure. Well, and I'm going to ask you a question, but first I wanted to make a point to what you were saying is, this is what I tell people all the time. Your government is not your country. Your church is not your country. Your God is not your country. The country is your country. You and I are the country, right? We have a culture. We like cheeseburgers and rock and roll, whatever, right? Yep. And so the idea of, like you said, tethering our identity to kicking ass or capitalists or whatever is, to me, foolhardy and dangerous. But to follow up with the question I was going to ask you, isn't this idea of nationalism relatively new? I mean, like up until about the late 1700s, I mean, did anybody really care? Like you said earlier, if you were a serf, working on some lord's plantation, you had your deal, and then he needed you to go fight this duke to get an extra acre. That was pretty much all you knew, right? Yeah. It wasn't like you were England.
You're right about that. I mean, there's some amount of bias of there were the Germans, even though Germany didn't exist yet, but it was really scattered. Like if you go back, it was to a great extent much more ethnic. We as Americans, we tend to think of just geography as the exact thing you're a part of. But if you go back, you'll have a German town in Romania that's been there for 300 years. You'll have an Italian town in France that's been there for 200 years. So people tend to think of themselves, if they thought of themselves as a group, they thought of themselves as an ethnicity or maybe a religion. And so it's not as if it was completely agnostic to the phenomenon. But by and large, though, yes, if you found out that the Austrian-Hungarian Empire took the Sudetenland or something, probably if you were the average peasant, it didn't make a lot of difference to you, because from your perspective, you were just some guy growing potatoes in a field, and that the duke that owns you is actually a Frenchman who lives in Paris or something like that. I'll say the further back you go, I become socialist pretty quick, retrospectively, when we get into history, because I do think a very good tool to look at when you're looking at any historical stuff prior to the Enlightenment is that it's almost like kings are a foreign invading country that have taken over the world, and they are their own team. They're on Team King. And feudal lords are the same way. Feudal lords are out for feudal lords. And even though they kind of fight with each other, they don't give a shit about the average person. And the average people have all been colonized by this foreign invasion economic power.
Sounds kind of like now.
Maybe, but I will say that I think that there's a very big difference in that I see a fundamental difference between exploitative wealth versus just exorbitant wealth.
Okay.
So J.K. Rowling, J.K. Rowling has far more money than me, but the relationship between me and J.K. Rowling is fundamentally different than that of a lord and a vassal, or that of a baron and a serf.
Well, J.K. Rowling is different than, say, like a Jeff Bezos or a Bill Gates, though, aren't they? Because J.K. Rowling just sold a bunch of books and got movie rights. She did.
Yeah, but I'd say with what did Bezos do? Unless Bezos is getting massive subsidies, or he's alternately
which he has,
banning competition through fiat, through
which he has
legislation,
which he does.
Insofar as he's done that, but that's not where he got his money from. He got his money from building Amazon and offering goods and services during a pandemic and being really good at it. Now, if he's keeping people out using government force through monopoly, I'm opposed to that. If he's getting big public subsidies, I'm opposed to that too.
Well, he paid Well, his public subsidy,
building up Microsoft, like Microsoft and Apple, expanded.
Yeah, and Bill Gates ramrodded every piece of competition, and no one. And Janet Reno was about the only one that actually brought antitrust legislation against him. Same thing with Jeff Bezos. And also, not paying federal taxes is a huge subsidy.
Hold on, but Bill Gates is not a lord, though. Like Bill Gates can't order you to die. He can't order you to do things. No,
he can't.
He's super wealthy. He can't hang.
He just told Oxford last year to can the AstraZeneca vaccines to the poor countries in Africa. That sounds lordish to me.
Elaborate on that.
Okay, so Oxford had cut a deal. Oxford University, the medical school there, had cut a deal with AstraZeneca. They were going to put vaccines into Africa for basically nothing. And Bill Gates swooped in and got pissed in Oxford and AstraZeneca's ear and said, you can't do that, because eventually we're going to try to sell vaccines to those people. Flash forward a year later, we're not accepting people from any countries that don't have a vaccine. That's like a liberal version of Trump's shithole comment from 3 years ago.
Well,
right?
I'm unfamiliar with this particular
And he
situation.
also owns and he also owns the most farmland of anybody in the United States. I find that disturbing. I find that very lordish too. And he's looking at privatizing water.
That makes sense, Abe. I think that people that tend to be kind of anti-market and come from an economically left-wing background tend to be more concerned about the gap than the floor. I am very much concerned about the floor. I'm not concerned about the gap. Like I find that there's a ton of people that just hate the idea of billionaires because they have a lot of money, therefore they're evil. I don't think that's the case.
No, I don't think that at all. I don't think that. I don't believe that at all. I think that would be naive to believe that. But the few billionaires that I think aren't evil, that earn their money, if you want to say honestly, like the Paul McCartneys and the J.K. Rowlings of the world, that's different.
Sure.
But if you bought the Washington Post for $600 million when it was worth $250 million, and you get a $600 million a year contract from the goddamn CIA, and the government is giving you $9 billion to fly your cock rocket with that stupid cowboy hat into space, which is half the NASA budget, by the way. NASA runs a $20 billion a year budget. I'm giving Jeff Bezos for a 10-minute joyride, half the NASA budget.
No, wait. Unpack this for me, because again, like if we're talking about if we're like my big issue here that I think is the defining element of like feudalism we're talking about is not economic disparity, but rather coercive force. It's predation, right? Like the difference between a feudal lord and Rockefeller is that the feudal lord is extracting wealth from people. Rockefeller was providing goods and services. Like Rockefeller became rich literally by selling oil lamps to people like me and you and other poor people back in the day.
And he shysted people with actual oil on their property. That's legion.
To finish, if you're producing a good and a service and you're making money off of that, even if it's a horrible industrial thing, apparently only creative people can be good. But I don't think that if you're making a good or a service in industry, it makes you automatically evil. Now, if you are using, again, coercive force, you're using the power of the state to staunch competition or to take money from people. That is predation. That is exploitative. So while I'm unfamiliar with the mechanics of Bezos's rocket trip, if he's getting the money from Uncle Sam, then I would say, yes, that is a problematic thing. That is an example of somebody forcibly extracting wealth from others and then lining their pockets with it. I don't know about the Washington Post CIA thing. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, basically,
first tell me the rocket thing. Like I know, like Elon Musk got a big subsidy. Did
he did.
Bezos get like a space subsidy? How did that pan out? What did it
like? So we got a few minutes, so I'll be real quick because I also want to talk about your show and everything. But so basically, Jeff Bezos got he bought the Washington Post, which at the time was worth about $250 million. He bought it for $600 million. And quickly he got into a media consulting contract, air quotes, with the CIA for $600 billion a year. He also sits on the Pentagon board, right? Which I think is kind of creepy.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I did not know that. Bezos does?
Mm-hmm. He sure does. And then
what does he have to do with the Pentagon? Why were they?
I don't know. But yeah. And it's like, and that's what's funny is, like I'll read my quote, lefty wacko shit. And then just to make sure I'm not completely crazy, I'll go like to AP or Reuters or something, and they'll have some casual article like, oh yeah, it's like totally okay. Like they report it unironically. Whereas if you're going to Truth Dig or Mint Press News, they're going to be a little bit more nasty about it. We gave him last year $9 billion for his rocket project. He then took that $9 billion and he bought MGM with it, right? He bought MGM UA. So we basically funded his MGM UA deal because he could afford to pay for both by himself without any problem. But he took our money to build a cock rocket, which we don't need another rocket ship. And we did the same thing with Bezos. The other thing with Elon Musk, the other thing
which by the way would fit my criteria of a lord, because that's somebody forcibly extracting wealth from us.
That's
selling something.
And that's my point. And then the other part of it is, yes, he sells. He has a good service. He has a good platform. It's fast and do da. But at what price? The joke I've been making for the last year and a half or so is UPS guys don't shit in hefty bags. And why is that? Well, they got the goddamn Teamsters on their side, and I know the Teamsters aren't saints either, but it's better than nothing. And right now, Amazon workers have nothing, right? And that's why they don't have a union. They have the same part-time schedule bullshit that Walmart has. And here's another thing. Walmart is another example. We give them $40 billion a year in Medicaid subsidies, housing subsidies, and food stamp subsidies, right? So that
doesn't Amazon start at $15 an hour that everybody's pushing for? Aren't they already voluntarily doing that?
They started voluntarily doing that, but that does not preclude their stock options after a certain amount of time. So you're starting out at $12, $13 an hour, and it works after your stock options and bonuses. It gets into $15 an hour. And I got a friend at the C-level suites that works at Amazon, who shall remain nameless because, he's a good friend of mine. I don't want to shame him and make him part of the show, but he's not paid what the warehouse guys are paid. Whereas the UPS guys at part-time, they have benefits. At 20 hours a week, you have benefits at UPS, right? And they don't pee in cups, and they don't have these magic gloves that vibrate if they're too far away from the package in the warehouse. It's a different model. UPS is a delivery service, not a service or product provider. But it just
and I think that this is a good example of kind of where we have some deviation here, because I think I find that kind of broadly speaking, left-wing economics, and I think you're somewhat oriented that direction, is very concerned with justice. It's very concerned with what is just and what is unjust.
That would be right.
And I am much more concerned with just the greater good, even if there is going to be injustice. What I mean by that is, option A, there is no Amazon. Option B, there is also Amazon, and they don't do what I'd like them to do. I would prefer option B. Now, if it's Amazon is existing because there's one pie and we just redivide it and Amazon just takes the existing pie, not in favor of that. But if the pie is this big and we quadruple the size of the pie, and now there's new jobs and there's new businesses and they can operate in there, but they're not how I'd like them, I'd still prefer that over the smaller pie, because overall that's going to have more prosperity, including for people working there. And I honestly don't know this question. Did Amazon displace an industry to come up? Because it seems to me that they built up a new industry out of nothing. But if they
built up a new industry out of nothing. However, they did displace booksellers, brick and mortar booksellers. They displaced parts sales. I mean, name an industry that you buy anything on Amazon from, and I don't know if that part was on purpose. I'm not going to assume Jeff Bezos is. I think he's a prick, but I don't think he's he's this diabolical mastermind at the age of 32. Whenever he got the idea to sell books out of his garage, borrowing money from his parents. I don't think he had this idea that I'm going to dismantle Barnes and Noble. But as it grew, and he just sort of got into the megalomaniacal phase, and as did Bill Gates. And then when you look at, and Elon Musk, for example, who did not invent Tesla, he bought it, but then insisted on putting his fucking name on as an inventor with the other guys. Dude, can you just buy it? Don't be the Jerry Jones of industry. Be the Robert Kraft of industry. Be the guy that signs the check. Don't be the idiot that has to get up there and go, I played football in Oklahoma in the 60s. I was second string and I never made the pros, but let me tell you how football works. I mean, we just treat these guys with
Microsoft. If you could push a button and Microsoft and Apple never existed, would you push it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if I wouldn't know any better, right? Sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I would definitely, or I would definitely refrain from that.
I would have to get a brain reset. I don't want to go back I don't want to go back knowing what I know now. That would suck. Like when people go, hey, let's go back in the time in the 1800s. No, I don't want to go back. No one bathed. I don't have a cell phone.
No, I guess my point is that I think with the data I've seen is with most billionaires, this is most, not all, but with most billionaires, they end up netting about 2% of the actual economic growth that they produce. Because again, we don't live in a stagnant zero-sum world. Like if we did, we'd be fighting over caves and things. The economy grows. The economy has grown massively over the last 50 years to the point where there's been a 40% reduction in absolute poverty, which has been through open markets. We've done the largest anti-poverty campaign in all of human history is taking place over the last 50 years, and it's been markets. And one of the driving forces in that are these people that wind up becoming billionaires. And usually they have some kind of dickish element to them. They've strong-armed competition, or they've done something that we would find. They end up keeping about 2% of the actual wealth.
But every market, every open market that you're talking about, for example, involves us invading another country and taking the crap for free. And
I don't think that's true. I mean, we have an open market with China. We haven't invaded China.
No, but
we've got a look. There are plenty of countries we trade with that we've not invaded. That's a demonstrably false.
It's not really plenty. The EU, the Russians, the Nordic countries, and China and Japan, which we kind of own anyway. So Central and South America, the Middle East, the only country we don't fuck over completely in the Middle East is the Saudis for whatever reason. I mean, they must have.
Are you asserting that the reason we have open markets is just because of imperialism?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Because right now we're saber. That's okay. We're right now.
Switzerland and places like that.
What I just said. I just said, with the exception of the EU, the Nordic countries, Russia, China, Japan. Look at what we're doing. And by the way, with China, we started saber rattling China 4 years ago when Trump put ships in the South China Sea. As soon as those guys discovered that they had oil and natural gas in the South China Sea. So now suddenly Taiwan is a human rights issue. and their province of China.
I'm not going to push back on America having malfeasance in its foreign policy. I don't disagree with that assertion. My overall point is just that you can have an open market without having imperialism. And when I bring up Switzerland, I don't mean it's not a place we've invaded. I mean, Switzerland has free and open trade with other countries without invading them. So the one is not predicated on the other. But if you want to have global prosperity, which is great, it's you need those open markets.
That's why China. That's another reason, though, why China's making these great deals with all these other countries, and they're not invading anybody. They're built the Roads and Belts Initiative, which pollution is kind of a bad thing, but they're still building roads and stadiums and parliament places and everything. And in exchange, all they want is you keep your resources, you nationalize them, you pay your people a living wage, do what you're going to do, and just sell it to us less than the EU and the US. Okay, great. And then they split. And that's why they only have 2 bases outside of fucking China, where we have 1,200 surrounding everybody. And we need a bad guy all the time. We still fuck with Iran 40 years later. It wasn't enough that we overthrew their election in 1953 and reinstalled the Shah, right? That wasn't enough. We have to continually screw with those guys. And by the way, Israel bombs them and Syria on a regular basis. What do we ever say about that? We never do. And how many countries has Iran been bombing?
Well, this is one of the big shames about, I think, the American populace, of which you are a very good counterexample, is sadly most Americans do not care about foreign policy as much as you clearly do, and I commend you on that. That's like having worked in television before. This is one of the things that I say. Like I have a master's degree in international.
I know politics. You do.
I'm interested in this, but sadly, the average American's not. And it's commendable that you're this knowledgeable and this engaged in it.
And I know you got to go here in a couple of minutes. And I really appreciate your time so far. I think that the reason I do, and about 2 years ago or last year when the election was going down, and I was rattling off on foreign policy, and this friend of mine, good kid. But I'm old enough to be his father. But he's very well versed and very knowledgeable. But he accused me of being a single issue voter, and I go, wait, foreign policy is a single issue. Okay, do you understand how that all ties into domestic? We have 60 million starving people in this country, and I don't use the word food insecure. I just say starving, because they're starving. If you had a meal a while ago and you don't know when the next one is, you're starving, right? We've got about 11 million people about to be evicted with all these moratoriums expiring. And we do nothing about it, but yet we can stroke a check for military all the time. How our foreign policy dictates, and by the way, we just spent 20 years getting our asses kicked in Afghanistan, right? To get rid of the Taliban, to replace them with the Taliban. And now we're talking about going into China with a straight face? That's a real army and a real navy and a real air force with real nukes. And we're saber rattling them? And then we use Taiwan as an excuse. I
can think of no good situation that would arise from China American going to war. That
there's none.
Worst case scenario, global nuclear warfare. Best case scenario, I guess Taiwan takes over China and we send a bunch of people over and then we have a base there forever and spend a bunch. That's the best case scenario. But more likely it'd be like several million people dead. You brought up building up infrastructure in other countries with their Belt Initiative. Gosh, how cool would that be if we'd been using that money to build stuff instead of bomb stuff?
Right.
It's kind of the neocon promise of we're gonna build up countries by bombing them. We'll bomb them into submission and then they'll grow back bigger and better. What do we do?
We'll sanction them into wealth. We'll bomb them into prosperity. But then this last point I want to make, and then I want to wrap up here. But in the last between Trump and Biden, we've sold Taiwan like $5 billion worth of weapons.
Yeah,
I would love to catch China selling California $5 billion worth of weapons and trying to get California to secede from the United States, and China threatening to go to war with the United States over secession for California. That's exactly what this is.
Can I give you a great analogy of what people in China are thinking? Because this is what I don't think we understand of why. I've been to China twice. The first time I was over there, I was hanging out with some commies, and you could just tell that they couldn't sleep at night because Taiwan was free. It drove them berserk. They hated it, and they're obsessed with it. And right now, there's Ping is lifting weights, staring at the ceiling, and there's just a map of China, and a map of Taiwan, he's glaring at it. The reason that there's so much umbrage there between the PRC and Taiwan is, imagine a scenario where Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis lose the war and somehow they flee to Rhode Island, and the Confederacy exists on Rhode Island.
Right.
And then Russia comes in and backs them and goes, no, this is the legitimate American government. Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. We are going to give them a shit ton of guns and a shit ton of cannons, and we are going to protect them in perpetuity. We might invade you sometime too, by the way. We're going to keep them right there just in case we ever want to invade, and they definitely want to invade. If they have a moment where they can come in and sack DC, they're going to do it. That's exactly how China feels about Taiwan, is that they are this kind of and I prefer the Taiwanese government over Beijing for sure, but I understand why they're worked up about it, because from their perspective, a group of separatists that wants to come in and change the regime is perched on their shores and backed up by a power that they view the same way we view the Soviet Union, as a foreign power that is right on our doorstep, right? Like as if Russia had a counter-American government in Rhode Island, prep and ready to go, and they were backing it up militarily. That's what they're experiencing.
And what you just said, I know confused 80% of anyone listening to this show. And I got it. I understood that. Well, hey, man, I could go down another rabbit hole with you, but I know you got to get going. So Political Orphanage, I'm going to put that in the show. And are you hosting anything else, or you're just hosting the show right now?
Yeah, I've got a couple of shows. So I'll say the Political Orphanage, I recommend people check it out. I realize I sound like a neoliberal shill. I get that. I get that, audience. I get why you think that. However, I have lots of interesting people on there. I just interviewed Andrew Yang earlier today. He's going to be on later this week. I think Andrew Yang is a great guy, and I think he'd be fun to listen to for your audience. And that regardless of where you sit economically, 80% of our conversations just talking about electoral reform and how to break up the duopoly, which I suspect that you'd be on board with, Abe.
Yeah.
I've had John McWhorter on recently. We were talking about wokeness as a new religion.
No shit.
Matt Ridley coming on soon. So there's lots of different things. I recommend the Political Orphanage for your listeners. I think that they would enjoy it, and I think that they'd find a lot of ideas that are, if not challenging, at least interesting. Other podcasts that I host a show called Alienating the Audience, which is a sci-fi program so nerdy, if you listen to 3 in a row, I promise your virginity will grow back. And I also host a comedy program called Friday Release Valve, which comes out every Friday, and I just kick around funny headlines on it. There's no substance to it. There's nothing remotely thinky about it. It's just reprobate comedians kicking around funny headlines.
Well, I can be as have me on the show. I can be as reprobate as possible. I mean, the only thing I do on this show is cuss, but I would love to talk about, dick jokes and what priests do on their spare time. That shit's fun for me. That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Great.
Well, guys,
have me on.
Hey, man, it's been a blast as always. Folks, my guest has been Andrew Heaton, the mighty Heaton. And again, you can catch his shows that he just mentioned. For sure, I'm putting Political Orphanage in the links of the show. And again, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.